The high desert was quiet at night, the kind of quiet that did not bring peace, but rather the sharp awareness of every sound that broke it. The rustle of grass, the snap of a twig, the distant echo of a coyote's cry. Nathaniel was not a man of the desert. He had come from far to the east, traveling through lands that seemed endless, drawn by trade and half a dream of freedom. But on nights like this, he wondered if the desert would swallow him whole. The air was sharp with cold, his breath spilling in faint clouds. He had set camp near the rocky bend of a stream that cut across the land like a silver scar. His horse was tethered nearby, restless, ears twitching at shadows Nathaniel could not see. Then he heard it, the unmistakable sound of a scream. It was faint, carried by the wind, but enough to freeze his blood. A woman's voice, ragged with pain, cut short as if choked by fear. He did not think. He grabbed the hunting knife at his belt, slung his rifle over his shoulder, and ran toward the sound. His boots struck against stone, slipped against patches of frozen earth. He moved like a man possessed, guided only by instinct and urgency. The scream came again, closer now, and then the growl. Low, guttural, savage, wolves. Nathaniel burst through a stand of mesquite, and the scene cut into his mind like a blade. A woman lay crumpled against the roots of a fallen tree, her dark hair loose and tangled with blood. Her leg twisted beneath her, torn where fangs had sunk deep. Her arm was raised, clutching a stone, weakly fending off the snarling beast that lunged at her throat. 3 wolves circled her, fur bristling, eyes burning with hunger and wildness. Nathaniel didn't stop to weigh the danger. He lunged. The rifle cracked, fire spitting from its mouth. One wolf yelped and fell back, blood spraying the dirt. The others turned, snarls deepening, teeth bared. The woman's eyes widened, not with gratitude but shock, perhaps even terror at the sight of him. But there was no time for questions. The second wolf leapt. Nathaniel swung his knife, steel flashing in moonlight. Teeth sank into his shoulder before the blade cut deep. Hot blood spilled down his arm, his body jerking under the force of the bite. He roared through the pain, driving the knife harder until the beast crumpled. The third wolf lunged for his leg. Nathaniel kicked, but its jaws clamped tight, ripping through flesh. He fell to one knee, the world spinning with agony. For a moment he thought he might break, collapse, leave them both to the hunger of beasts. But then her voice, weak, trembling, but fierce. "Fight!" The word ripped through the haze, sharp as flint. He did. With a growl torn from the bottom of his lungs, he plunged the knife into the wolf's neck, again and again, until the jaws slackened, the body fell still. And then there was silence. The silence after violence. Nathaniel collapsed backward, gasping, clutching his bleeding leg and shoulder. He had no strength left, only the dull throb of pain echoing through him. The woman's breathing was ragged. Her eyes, dark, deep, and burning with both suspicion and something unspoken, locked on his. She did not thank him, did not move toward him. Instead, she dragged herself upright with a hiss of pain, pressing her hand against her torn leg. "You stranger," she rasped, voice heavy with her people's tongue but shaped around words he understood. "Why?" Nathaniel swallowed hard, spitting blood from his lip. "Because they would have killed you." She studied him, eyes narrowing as if weighing truth from deceit. Her gaze lingered on his wounds, the crimson soaking his coat, the tremble in his arm as he fought to stay upright. "You bleed for me." Her tone was not wonder but accusation, as if his choice carried weight beyond his knowing. Nathaniel let out a ragged laugh, though it hurt. "Seems so." Her face softened just slightly, but suspicion remained. Her people had reasons not to trust outsiders, reasons older than either of them. The night pressed in. The wolves' bodies lay sprawled like shadows against the pale earth. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the smell of iron and death. Nathaniel tried to rise, but pain knifed through his leg, and he nearly collapsed again. The woman watched him, jaw tight, torn between distrust and the undeniable truth. Without him, she would already be dead. At last, with a sharp breath, she crawled toward him, wincing with every movement. She tore a strip from the hem of her dress, dark with dirt and blood, and pressed it against his shoulder. He flinched at the sting but did not pull away. Her hands were steady despite her own wounds. Close now, he could see the strength carved into her features, the high bones of her cheeks, the determination etched in her brow, the storm in her eyes. "Rest," she said firmly, as if commanding him. You saved me. Now I save you. Nathaniel let his head rest back against the tree. His vision swam, but in that haze, one truth anchored him. He had seen her, fought for her, bled for her. And in her eyes, he saw something ignite, reluctant, forbidden, but alive. The first spark of a fire neither of them had chosen. The wolves were dead, but the danger was not. Blood still ran hot between them, his soaking into the earth and hers dark against her torn leg. The air stank of iron, fur, and fear. The desert had gone silent, as though it too was watching what would come next. Nathaniel's head swam, pain pounding through him in waves. His shoulder burned, his leg throbbed, and his hands shook from the effort of holding himself upright. He forced a smile, though it was weak and bitter. Well, he rasped, voice rough, that was a fine way to meet. The woman did not smile. Her gaze lingered on him, sharp as a blade. Her lips pressed together, as though she fought against words she dared not speak. She only tightened the cloth against his wound. You bleed too much, she muttered. Her accent lilted with Apache cadence, her words shaped carefully in English. You die if I leave you. Nathaniel huffed out a laugh, though it nearly cost him his breath. So you're not leaving then? Her dark eyes snapped to his, hard as flint. I should. There it was, the truth between them. He was no kin of hers, no trusted ally. To her, he was a stranger, maybe even a threat. Yet here they were, tethered by blood spilled under the same moon. The woman shifted, reaching into the leather pouch at her side. Her hands, though trembling, worked quickly, grinding herbs between stones she carried, mixing them into a dark paste. She pressed it into his wounds without hesitation. The sting was fire. Nathaniel bit down on a groan, his jaw tightening until his teeth ached. Hold still, she ordered. Pain means life. You still live. He obeyed, watching her in silence. Up close, she seemed both fragile and unbreakable. Her skin glowed bronze in the moonlight, her hair clung to her cheeks in tangled strands, and her jaw was set in determination despite the injury in her leg. When she finished binding him with strips of her dress, she finally sat back against the tree, her breath ragged. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment. You saved me, he said softly. She glanced at him, her eyes flashing. You saved me first. Silence stretched between them. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and ash. The desert night was deep and endless, stars burning cold above. At last, Nathaniel cleared his throat. What do I call you? The woman hesitated. Names were not given lightly. Then, almost reluctantly, she said, Ahioka. The name fit her resolute, carrying something ancient and proud. Nathaniel let it rest on his tongue, careful. Ahioka. Her gaze flicked toward him, wary, as if his saying it out loud carried danger. Perhaps it did. And you, she asked at last. Nathaniel, he replied, though most just call me Nate. She gave the barest nod, her expression unreadable. They sat together in the stillness, two wounded bodies pressed against the same tree. He should have felt only pain. Instead, he felt the strange pull of her presence, sharp, undeniable, unsettling. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, as though softened by exhaustion. Why were you here? Passing through, Nathaniel said truthfully. Trading, looking for work, maybe a place I could stay for a while. Not your land, she said flatly. No, he admitted, not mine. Her eyes lingered on him, dark and searching, before she finally turned away. She shifted her leg, wincing at the movement. Nathaniel noticed the blood seeping through her makeshift bandage. You're worse off than me, he said. I can walk. You sure? She shot him a sharp look. I must. Nathaniel knew better than to argue. There was a strength in her that defied reason, a refusal to yield. Yet he also knew that if she pushed herself too hard, they might both end the night dead in the dirt. So he offered the only thing he could. Then lean on me. The silence after his words was heavy, her brows knit, suspicion flashing again. Trust was not hers to give, yet after a long pause, she gave the smallest nod. With his arms slung weakly around her shoulder and hers braced against his side, they managed to rise. Every step was agony, but it was movement, and movement meant survival. They stumbled together toward the embers of his small campfire, each dragging the other forward. When they reached it, Nathaniel sank down hard, his body near collapse. Ahioka lowered herself with more grace, though the pain in her leg was obvious. The firelight cast them both in flickering gold and shadow. Nathaniel fed what little wood he had into the flames, coaxing life into the embers until warmth spread into the night. Ahioka sat across from him, her eyes reflecting the fire, unreadable. She watched him for a long time, and Nathaniel had the strange sense that she saw more of him than he wished. "You are foolish," she said finally. He raised an eyebrow. "Because I fought? Because you bled for someone not yours?" Nathaniel leaned back, a faint smirk tugging at his lip despite the pain. "Then I guess I'll keep being foolish." Her lips pressed into something almost like a frown, almost like a smile, though it never fully formed. She pulled her shawl tighter around her, gaze flicking toward the stars as if searching for answers. Nathaniel followed her gaze, the fire crackling between them. For all their wounds, for all the unspoken walls between their worlds, there was something undeniable here, a thread tying them together. He could feel it, and from the way her eyes lingered on him when she thought he wasn't looking, he knew she felt it too, but neither of them spoke it aloud. Not yet. The desert morning carried the faint coolness of night, but soon the sun would blaze overhead, baking the earth and every creature beneath it. Raphael stirred awake beneath the shade of a mesquite tree, every muscle in his body aching, his bandaged wounds throbbing with a dull fire. The memory of snarling wolves still haunted him, gnashing teeth, the hot sting of flesh tearing, her terrified eyes in the darkness. He forced himself upright, leaning on his elbow. Just a few feet away, Ahiona crouched near a small fire, her hands busy grinding herbs with a stone pestle. Her dark hair, unbound and messy from sleep, caught faint light, and the streaks of ash on her cheek made her look both fierce and fragile at once. She didn't notice him watching at first. Her lips moved in what seemed like a prayer, whispered words too soft to catch. Only when she glanced up did their eyes meet. "You live," she said flatly, though her voice carried a trace of relief she didn't want to admit. Raphael gave a weak smile. Hard to kill a man who's too stubborn to die. Ahiona's expression didn't soften. Instead, she dipped her fingers into the paste she had been making and moved toward him. "Do not speak like that. You nearly bled into the sand last night. The wolves would have dragged your body away." Her tone was sharp, but her hands were gentle as she unwrapped the bandages and applied the cool mixture. Raphael hissed at the sting. "What is it?" he asked, biting back a groan. "Yucca root, sage, and resin," she replied without looking up. "It draws out poison, keeps the wound clean." Raphael studied her face. She was so young, and yet her hands moved with practiced certainty. There was no trembling, no hesitation. She had learned these skills long before last night. "You've done this before," he murmured. Her eyes flickered up briefly, wary. "Every Apache woman must know how to tend wounds. Our men return from hunting and from war. We do not wait for help." There was silence for a long moment, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the low murmur of the desert wind. Finally, Raphael said softly, "Then perhaps I am lucky it was you who found me." Her hands stilled. She did not meet his gaze, but he saw the faint flush rise along her cheekbones. "You were unlucky to be bitten," she corrected quickly. "That is all." The day stretched onward, heavy and slow. Raphael drifted in and out of restless sleep, while Ahiona remained watchful. She gathered prickly pears, skinned rabbits, boiled roots. He noticed how she never stopped moving, as though stillness would betray her to some unseen danger. By evening, the desert had shifted into colors of fire and gold. Ahiona finally sat down beside him, her knees drawn to her chest. They watched the horizon together, though neither spoke at first. At last, Raphael broke the silence. "Why were you alone last night? When the wolves came?" Her shoulders stiffened. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. But finally, in a voice low and guarded, she said, "I was sent to gather herbs for the medicine woman. I wandered too far. My tribe, they do not know where I am." "And now," he asked gently, "will you return?" Ahiona's jaw tightened. "I must, but if they see me with you," she trailed off, shaking her head. Raphael understood. She didn't have to explain. A stranger, a man outside their blood and law, it would not matter that he had saved her. To them, he would be an intruder. Perhaps even an enemy. Still, he could not stop himself from asking, would they truly cast you aside for being helped? Her dark eyes turned to him, sharp as obsidian. "You do not understand. Our people, we belong to one another." Outsiders bring danger, distrust. If they know you touched me, carried me, fought for me, she paused, her throat working, they would see it as more than help. The air grew tense, heavy with the weight of what she didn't say aloud. Raphael's chest tightened, not just from pain but from something else, something he wasn't ready to name. You can tell them whatever you wish, he said finally. I won't speak of it, but she only shook her head. Secrets have a way of speaking for themselves. That night, as the fire burned low, Raphael woke to find Ahiona standing alone a short distance away, staring up at the stars. She looked so small against the vastness of the sky, yet there was a strength in her stance, in the way her chin lifted to meet the endless dark. He wanted to go to her, to stand beside her, but the throb in his leg reminded him he was still half broken. So instead, he whispered into the silence, "You are not as alone as you think." Her head turned slightly, just enough to show she heard him, but she said nothing. Still, he thought he saw her shoulders ease, just a fraction, as though the weight she carried had lightened, if only by the smallest breath. By the fourth day, Raphael's wounds no longer oozed, though the bites still ached like fire when he moved too suddenly. He forced himself to walk, leaning on a crude staff Ahiona had cut from a mesquite branch. Each step was a struggle, but he gritted his teeth and bore it, determined not to look weak before her. Ahiona didn't make it easier for him. She led the way across the desert with the pace of someone who had walked this land since birth, swift, sure-footed, silent. Her gaze shifted constantly, scanning the brush, the distant ridges, the sky itself. She didn't waste words on him unless necessary, yet somehow her silence carried more weight than most people's chatter. "You walk like a hawk hunts," Raphael muttered at one point, trying to distract himself from the fire crawling up his leg. Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "Better to be a hawk than prey." Her answer lingered in his mind long after the words faded. By midday, the sun was ruthless, hanging high and merciless. They rested in the thin shade of a canyon wall, the red rock rising behind them like a great, silent guardian. Raphael lowered himself to the ground with a sharp hiss, sweat streaking his face. Ahiona knelt beside him, pulling out a pouch of herbs and roots. Without speaking, she ground them with a stone, added water from her gourd, and pressed the cool paste onto his wounds. He watched her work, the sure movements of her hands, the way her brows furrowed with concentration. "You've saved me twice now," he said softly, "once from wolves and now from fever." She shook her head without looking at him. "You saved yourself, you are stubborn," he chuckled weakly. "You sound like my mother." That made her pause, her eyes flickered to his, curious. "Your mother, where is she?" Raphael's smile faltered. He swallowed, gaze dropping to the sand. "Gone." "Many years now?" For the first time, she didn't press further. Instead, she adjusted the bandage and said nothing. The silence between them was not sharp this time, but soft, like a space shared. When they continued onward, the land shifted. Scrub gave way to taller grass, scattered junipers dotting the hills. The air smelled faintly of pine carried on the wind, but the change also brought unease. Ahiona grew tense, her steps quicker, her gaze sharper. Raphael noticed. "You know this land," he said, her voice was low. "It is close to my people, too close." He stopped, leaning on his staff. "Then why bring me here?" Her eyes met his, hard but conflicted. "Because I cannot leave you to die in the desert." "And yet, if they see you," she broke off, shaking her head. The truth hung heavy between them. If her tribe discovered she was traveling with an outsider, no matter the reason, suspicion would fall. A woman seen with a man was rarely judged kindly, especially one who was not her husband, not her people. Raphael straightened despite the pain. "Then I'll go another way. You don't owe me anything, Ahiona." Her breath caught, and for the first time she looked almost angry. "Do not speak like that. You carry 7 bites for me. You bleed because of me. Do you think I would let you stumble off to die alone?" He blinked at her, startled. In her eyes, fierce fire burned, a fire born of duty, yes, but something else too. Something she hadn't yet admitted, maybe even to herself. "You speak as though my life matters to you," Raphael said quietly, her jaw clenched. She turned away. "Do not twist my words." But he had seen the truth flicker across her face, and it stirred something deep in him. That evening, as the sky blazed with streaks of orange and violet, they camped in the shelter of a cliff overhang. The fire crackled low, casting shifting light across the rock. Raphael lay back on his blanket, gazing at the stars emerging overhead. "Your people must have stories for these," he murmured. "The stars." "The moon." Ahiona was silent a long while, then said, "We believe the stars are the campfires of those who came before us. They watch, they guide." Raphael turned his head to look at her. The firelight painted her skin in warm tones, her eyes dark pools reflecting both fire and starlight. "Then your ancestors are watching now," he said softly. "What do you think they see?" Her gaze didn't leave the sky. "They see a foolish woman who let herself be caught in the company of a stranger." "And me?" he pressed, almost whispering. At last her eyes lowered to his. Her voice was a whisper too, trembling but steady. "A man who should not matter, but does." The silence after those words was heavier than any wolf's growl, more dangerous than any desert night. Raphael's heart pounded against his ribs, and though she looked away quickly, he knew what had passed between them could not be unspoken. The sound of distant drums reached them before dawn. Ahiona froze, her sharp ears catching what Raphael could barely make out at first. The steady beat, low and rhythmic, echoing faintly across the hills. He knew enough to recognize it wasn't random noise, it was people, her people. She turned swiftly, her braids swinging across her shoulder. "We must move." Raphael struggled to his feet, leaning on his staff. His legs screamed with every step, but the look on Ahiona's face told him this was not the time to complain. She was tense, her shoulders taut as a bowstring. Every rustle in the grass, every shifting shadow drew her eyes. They pushed through brush and rocky slopes until at last she stopped beneath a stand of twisted junipers. She pressed her back to the trunk, her chest rising quickly. "They are close," she whispered. Raphael studied her face. The fire in her eyes was different now, fear, not for herself but something deeper. "Your people would kill me," he said quietly. Her lips parted, but she didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "Not only you. They would think me tainted. A woman alone with a stranger, they would not listen to why." The weight of her words hit him hard. It wasn't just his life on the line, it was hers, her honor, her place among her people. He saw now that her courage in keeping him alive had cost her more than effort. It risked her very belonging. "Then leave me," he said firmly. "Go back. Pretend we never met. I'll find my way." Her eyes snapped to his fierce. "Do not speak of such foolishness again. I will not abandon you." Raphael's throat tightened. He had faced death under the wolf's jaws, but nothing unnerved him like the sight of this woman, unflinching, ready to stand against her own kin for him. They traveled under cover of darkness, slipping through the trees, moving when the moon was hidden behind drifting clouds. Raphael was slower, every step grinding through pain, but Ahiona stayed close, guiding him with a hand when he stumbled. Her touch, even fleeting, burned like something forbidden but undeniable. By dawn, they found themselves in a narrow canyon, the cliffs towering so high they blocked the sun. The river ran shallow here, trickling over stone. Ahiona motioned for him to sit while she scanned the path ahead. Raphael lowered himself carefully onto the rock. "How long can we keep this up?" he asked. Her gaze flickered back to him, shadows clinging to her expression. "Not long. The land belongs to them. Every trail, every canyon. If we are seen," she didn't finish. The unspoken words hung between them. Death. That night, when they camped by the faint glow of embers, Raphael found himself staring at her silhouette against the firelight. "You risk everything for me," he said quietly. Ahiona didn't look at him. She was weaving strips of dried yucca into cord, her fingers deft and strong. "Do not mistake it. I do what must be done." He studied her in silence for a moment, then said, "And if you had let me die that night, the wolves would have finished me and no one would know." Her hands stilled. Slowly, she raised her eyes to his. "I would know." The words struck him deeper than any wound. "You speak as if my life matters," he said softly. Ahiona's lips parted, but she seemed caught, torn between denial and truth. At last, she whispered, "It does." The fire crackled, the only witness to her confession. Raphael's breath caught, and for a long moment neither of them moved. The air was heavy with all the things they couldn't say, shouldn't say. Finally, she rose abruptly, as if the nearness had become too much. She walked to the edge of the canyon, her figure outlined against the stars. Raphael watched her, his chest aching with something he didn't dare name. At dawn, everything unraveled. The sound of horses carried on the wind, hoofbeats, many of them, echoing down the canyon. Ahiona's eyes widened. She rushed to Raphael's side, her voice urgent. "They are coming." Raphael forced himself up, gripping his staff, though his legs screamed with pain. "Then go," he rasped. "If they see you with me," she shook her head fiercely. "No. I will not leave you." The hoofbeats grew louder, the drumming of pursuit filling the canyon. Shadows appeared at the far bend, riders, their silhouettes sharp against the rising sun. Ahiona grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a narrow crack in the cliffside. "This way!" They stumbled into the cleft, pressed close together in the shadows as the riders thundered past. Raphael could feel her heartbeat against him, fast and wild, her breath hot against his chest. When the riders' echoes faded, neither moved. The closeness was too much, the brush of her hair against his cheek, the heat of her body against his, the forbidden bond tightening between them. "Ahiona," he whispered. She closed her eyes, as though the sound of her name and his voice was too much to bear. For one heartbeat, the world held its breath. The canyon did not keep them safe for long. By midday, the riders' tracks cut across every path they tried to take, the scent of smoke carried on the wind. Ahiona knew what it meant. Scouts had already swept through this land, and the rest of her people were near. To be caught with Raphael now would not just bring suspicion, it would bring judgment swift as an arrow. She led him higher, into the rougher ridges where boulders split the ground and cactus bloomed stubborn between the cracks. Raphael's leg throbbed with every climb, and sweat dripped into his beard, but he said nothing. Pride kept his mouth shut, desperation kept his body moving. Finally, they stopped at a plateau overlooking the valley below. Smoke rose in the distance where fires marked a camp. The sight pulled the strength from Ahiona's shoulders. "My people are there," she said, voice low, heavy. "It is no longer safe to run." Raphael followed her gaze, then lowered his eyes to her. "What do we do?" Her breath trembled as she answered. "We face them." That night, Ahiona built a fire in the open. The flames were small but visible, a beacon she knew the scouts would see. She sat across from Raphael, the firelight sharpening her cheekbones, her dark eyes reflecting the blaze. "You should know," she said softly. "If they ask me why you live, I will not lie. I will tell them what you did, that you bled for me." "That 7 bites did not stop you." Raphael held her gaze. "And if that is not enough," her lips pressed tight, "then I will stand beside you, whatever the price." His chest ached at her words, sharper than any wound. For so long he had wandered alone, carrying only his own name, his own burdens. Now here was a woman bound to him not by choice but by fate, and yet she stayed. "Why?" he asked quietly. Her eyes did not waver. "Because when you should have run, you stayed. Because when I was prey, you made yourself a shield. Because," she faltered, breath catching, "because you matter." The fire popped, sparks spiraling into the night sky. Raphael reached across the flames, his hand hovering just short of hers. "Ahiona," she didn't pull away. Her fingers trembled, then slowly, bravely, she let them brush his. The touch was fleeting, but it was enough to brand them both with something dangerous. They didn't wait long. Before dawn, riders appeared at the ridge. Torches flared against the sky, and shadows moved closer. Ahiona rose, her back straight, her chin high, though her heart pounded. Raphael struggled to his feet, gripping his staff like a weapon, though he knew it would do little against warriors armed with bows and rifles. The Apache men surrounded them swiftly, horses snorting, eyes sharp with suspicion. One dismounted, tall, broad-shouldered, his hair tied with eagle feathers. His gaze cut first to Ahiona, then to Raphael. "What is this?" His voice was steel. Ahiona stepped forward before Raphael could speak. "This man saved me. Wolves would have torn me apart, but he stood against them. He carries the scars to prove it." The warrior's eyes narrowed. He studied Raphael, the bandaged leg, the staff. "And why does he walk with you still?" "Because his wounds would have killed him without care," Ahiona answered steadily. "Because no one deserves to bleed alone in the desert." A murmur rippled among the men. The leader's jaw tightened. "He does not belong here. You know this, Ahiona." "You shame yourself walking beside him." The words struck, but she did not flinch. "I shame myself only if I abandon honor. He saved my life. I will not repay that with silence." Raphael's chest swelled with both pride and dread. He could see the fury burning in some of the riders' eyes, the disgust in others. But in Ahiona's voice, unshaken, he heard something stronger, truth. The standoff stretched until the leader finally spoke again, his tone colder. "You will come back to camp, both of you. The elders will decide." Raphael caught Ahiona's glance. He saw the fear she tried to hide, but also the steel beneath it. She gave the faintest nod. And so, under the rising sun, they were led toward her people's camp. The air between them hummed with tension, their hands never touching, their words kept silent. But every step forward bound them tighter in a fate neither of them had chosen, and neither could now escape. The night had been long, woven with whispers, danger, and promises that trembled on the edges of their lips. The wolves were gone, their howls fading into the memory of blood and shadows. The fire had burned low, leaving only a faint glow that painted both of them in hues of amber and ash. Ahiv had drifted in and out of consciousness, her hand never leaving his. The wounds he bore told their story without words, 7 deep scars that would mark him for life, carved into his skin by the teeth of the wilderness. Yet, in her eyes, they were not marks of ruin, but proof of devotion. When the first light broke through the trees, it kissed the earth gently. Morning mist rose from the forest floor, and the birds returned, their songs tentative, as if unsure if peace had truly returned. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would unfold between them. He stirred before she did, his body stiff, aching, but alive. He looked down at her sleeping form, her face softened in rest, framed by strands of dark hair that had fallen loose. For a long moment, he did not move. He only watched, memorizing her, as though she were a dream he feared might vanish with the day. When her lashes fluttered and her gaze finally found his, the morning light seemed to shift, as if it belonged to her. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice hoarse, threaded with relief. "I am," he said, his lips curving into the faintest smile, though pain tugged at every muscle. "Though I think the wolves took most of me." Her eyes shimmered with something between laughter and tears. "You gave too much, Ahiv, more than anyone should have." "And yet," he murmured, reaching to brush a loose strand of hair from her face, "I would give more if it meant you would see another sunrise." Her heart ached with the weight of his words. This bond between them, born in secrecy, deepened by danger, was something neither of them could have chosen, and yet it had chosen them. She pressed his hand to her lips, a gesture forbidden, yet impossible to resist. "Then know this, I would fight the world if it tried to take you from me." For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine it, not a stolen moment, not a fleeting fire, but a life. A life where the path of a traveler and the duty of a daughter of her people could walk side by side. The forest seemed to approve, the breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers, the river nearby whispering its endless song. The scars on his body throbbed, but in her gaze, he found healing far deeper than flesh. "Then let them come," he said softly, his voice steady with the resolve of someone who had faced death and found something worth living for. "Let the wolves, the tribes, even fate itself stand in our way. I will not let go of you." And in that moment, beneath the rising sun, their love was no longer forbidden. It was defiant, sacred, and eternal. The world might never accept them, but the earth itself bore witness. A traveler and a woman bound by blood, fire, and a morning that promised more than survival. Their story had begun in silence, in secrecy, but it would live in the echoes of the land, carried by the wind, remembered by the trees. And though the scars of the night would never fade, neither would the vow that had been forged in the fire of their forbidden love. The next morning, the world awoke anew.